Ciao, jewelry makers. What I am sharing with you today on my work table is a project that is so joyful and so sweet. I am making these beaded doll bookmarkers. So I'm going to start by showing you just some of the supplies that I pulled from my craft room and from even my manicure supplies and scraps of things that I have saved, because that is all you need to dress these little dolls. So I have two that are set up for me to make with you, and I'll just show you that the little doll forms came from Amazon, and there are a few colors. I have bronze and silver. So they come with the wire or head pin already attached to the little empty body, and the arms and legs are jointed, and they have little boots. So I started with this Amazon doll form, and then I have a package of these beautiful bookmarkers that are embossed in different patterns and designs from Amazon. And I have also made my own, and I do like to make my own, but I thought these were quite beautiful. So from my supplies, I have some scraps of trim like this. I had some of these acrylic dog beads, which I used on her. You can see scraps of chain. I have just a scrap of ribbon, which is what I made her shirt out of. This one, her skirt, is made from a little doll dress from the dollar store, $1.25, and I had this left over from doing this doll, and it is enough to do the skirt on another one. So then, as you are creating, you can put anything you want in their hands. So these little doll forms have a small hole through one of the hands, and that's where you can attach a wire or a jump ring. So on her, I used some beads, a cube bead and a rondelle and some wire, and made a little purse for her. This little girl is walking her dog. And so this is why I've made so many of these, because when you start thinking about the themes and the designs and the things that you can have these little girls holding on to, your creativity will run wild. So I even thought about a girl with her cat on her leash. I picked these up at Joann's Crafts here in America. And I will talk to you about a few other supplies that I have pulled out as I was doing the details, the dressmaker details, and the pretty little embellishments. This little tassel is from a Jessie James bead mix. Her necklace is made with a little scrap, a leftover length of chain. And let's see what else is unique. Her little bangles are just 3mm jump rings. This little girl, I actually made the bookmarker on this one, and this little girl has a bow on the front of her dress, which is actually a fingernail embellishment charm that goes on your nails after a manicure. And I also found those from Amazon, and even small little tiny sequins that I added to the skirt. And so I'm going to show you the secrets of giving these dressmaker details to these little dolls without any sewing, no needle and thread, no pressing, no iron, none of the normal sewing. So let's get started. I will show you the first one that I'm going to make. I have already started her. So I have this little part of her skirt already made, and I already created this piece, which will be her V-neck top. Let me lay her here so we can look at her. And so I've already started designing her head and her hat and her neck. So let me take these off and show you one by one. So she needs a little bit of a neck. If you put your bead straight down, it doesn't quite give her the right proportions. So I'm using a small crystal rondelle spacer, which doubles as a look for a choker necklace and also for her neck. And then I'm adding one of these faceted barrel beads. And I love the sparkle and the AB finish on this with no face or anything. And then this bead cap makes a lovely little city hat. And then I'm using a gold lined, really opaque pink seed bead just for the top of her hat. The only thing I discovered in making these is that you can't get too creative with the doll's neck, head, and hat because they didn't give you a quite long enough piece of wire to do a nice wire wrapped loop. You just don't have much left to work with for making your loop. So that's about as much as I could add to the top of her. So I won't do this part first. I like to make the clothes first, but I just wanted to show you that I had already pulled from my supplies. I have things here that I take out, and this is why I end up making a lot of them, because is no end to the possibilities of what you could put in their little hands. And if you are making these for gifts, then that may determine what you choose. So this is a little photo frame charm, and you could hang a bead from the bottom and put a personalized photo for someone. That would be cute in her hand. I also have these in my stash, and I believe that I ordered these from Amazon. It's a little teapot and teacup, so a jump ring on the handle of either one of those could be really adorable in her hand. And then I'm going to show you on the other one that I plan to make, I found some little books, which is really nice to keep your theme going if you are making these into bookmarkers. I have done a couple of bookmarkers, and so now I think I might turn this one into a pendant on maybe a little bit longer chain. So I have decided on this little girl. I think when she's finished, I'll have a look at all of my possibilities again. But I think on this little girl, she is going to have a golden leash and maybe be walking her dog. So these little dog charms, I found them on BB Craft. And let's see, the other thing, since she is going to have a couture outfit of pink and orange, I have some little coated jump rings that are just 3mm, and I have pulled those out, the pink and orange, to match her outfit for some bangles on her small little arm. And then these are also a thing that I've had forever from Amazon. These are fingernail charms that you glue on your fingernails after you've done a French manicure or some kind of a manicure. And I always find these things on Amazon. They come like this, little pearls, all kinds of gemstones and hearts and geometric shapes. And these are what you put on your nails if you want to embellish a manicure. And so they're really lovely on your fingernails. A little rhinestone bow, especially if you have longer nails. But I was just looking around my house at the things that I have that could be used for couture tiny outfits, and so I thought maybe on this little girl she would have a bow. I have a pearl one as well. So as I said, you will see when you start pulling out scraps and different supplies from your sewing box, your craft room, your leftover chain, you will see that your creativity just goes crazy while making these. So let me show you the other little doll that we're going to make together. I'll pull in my other dish because I have some things separated. So she is going to be silver. And I found at one of the local craft stores, I found these beads. They are ceramic and the face is painted on them. Now the only thing I don't like about these is they are two-sided. So on these, if you don't have enough space to do a nice tight wire wrapped loop, it could be that her face turns and is not always facing forward. So that is one thing that I didn't care for, but all of that being said, it's really adorable. So the same thing on her. I just played with my supplies until I found what I wanted for a beautiful crystal necklace, and then I'll put her face on, and then I found this wonderful flower bead cap that makes a beautiful hat. It's a little bit oversized, so that looks like a nice brim on a hat. And I like to stack bead caps, so I just played around with my silver bead caps because I decided this little girl is going to be all silver. And so she has already a lovely little face and a hat. And then I just want to top it off with a tiny little check glass bead that was left over from one of my necklace projects. And so that's what I think I will do for her face. So I'm just showing you how I get started before I actually start connecting anything to my little dolls, because then in order to have these things not in my way, I'll take everything off and do the clothing first. But let me see, I have pulled in some of this silver ribbon that I just had in my ribbon box. I don't know if I'll use it, but I thought it might be a lovely belt if I folded it over. And let's see what else. I am going to use the scrap for her skirt. I think I will use the pink ribbon that I already did on this little girl. And I'm not sure what else. That is the beauty of making these dolls, is that you just layer them with your scraps and keep adding details to make them so lovely. So let's take her. I actually was thinking in her hand that I might give her a teapot. This is a teapot bead frame where you add the base and then a bead and then the top part and a little top for the teapot. And these were on the Beadbox Bargains website some time ago. I do not know if they are still on that website, but it is a really sweet little way to embellish a bead and create a teapot. So I was thinking on my silver girl, she might have a silver teapot in her hand. And then I did the same thing for her, where I matched the pink and purple with these little painted or silicone covered 3mm jump rings, and she's going to have some little bangles on her arm. There are several ways to turn these little couture beaded dolls into bookmarkers. As I said, you can buy plain ready-made metal bookmarkers at the craft store. I happen to order these from Amazon. I also make my own out of wire, put it on my bench block and hammer it and put some texturizing on it and just create a loop at this end. So I did that on this one. But another way that I love and most often will make my bookmarkers is to create a satin cord with a finished end that I can add my jump rings to. And on this one, this is one of my handmade boho beads. And coincidentally, a lot of the scraps that I use to embellish and make the clothing for the little dolls are the same scraps, wires, and beads and small things that I use when I make my own handmade beads. So I had already done this bookmarker in silver and pink and purple, and this end is ready for the silver doll that we are going to make. But I wanted to show you that because as you start shopping for supplies, and what I mean by shopping is really go through your scrap boxes, your ribbon boxes, leftover beads, look through your bead soup, your extra bead caps. All of those things can be phenomenal in this little doll design. But I do have these in mind sometimes when I'm looking at supplies. So I found these tiny little passports, which would be adorable in one of their little hands. I showed you I have found these little books. And so on a design like this, you could have the doll with something in her hand like a teacup, and then you could hang the teapot and some beads from the other end. Or you could create her to look like a fairy and then have her little locket fairy house at the other end of the bookmarker. And the ideas just go on and on when you start looking at some of the unique jewelry charms that are out there. As I said, you could do this larger teapot on one end and do your doll on the other end and have a little teacup in her hand. And then even if you guys remember, sometime maybe a year ago, we had these little ceramic sheep. For those of you that subscribe to the Bargain Bead Box, I never used mine. I couldn't figure out what to do with these little ceramic sheep beads, but they were so cute, so I did not destash them. And honestly, I was looking at my beaded dolls and thinking that it could be Mary and her little lamb. The themes just, your creativity just will go crazy when you start putting these together. Also, I had this little bag of heart charms that I've had in my supplies for a long time. So your little girl could be holding a heart, or you could do a heart in her hand and then a larger one on the other end that says made with love or I love you hearts for a gift for someone. They are just so sweet. And as I said, on the silver girl, I even thought about a piece of silver chain and have a girl with her little cat on a leash. The ideas just are endless. The possibilities are endless. So I'm going to clear all of this away and let's start by making our silver girl together. So I'm going to start by removing all of her top pieces, her hat, her head, her little neck, and start with an empty form. And so these little embellishments we will not need until we have her clothes on. So if you want to, her jointed arms and legs are simply jump rings. So if you find that these are in the way as you try to do the couture details of her clothing, you can just remove the arms. I have done every single one of mine with the arms left intact. I think it helps me get my placement and my scale correct on these. So the other thing that I have here on my table is some tacky glue. I have a glue stick, and I do have a little bit of this Loctite gel super glue. And I will just keep that handy because this is a very free form project, and I basically do whatever it takes to get my couture details and keep them in place. So I have these things handy and I will see what I use. Also, you have seen I keep this gift wrapping tape nearby. I use it for a lot of things when I'm gluing a bead cap to a seashell or so much. But as you can see, I keep a few pieces of just a very simple gift wrapping tape on the edge of my table when I'm doing this. And so this scrap that was left over from the little dollar store doll dress, this satin fabric was fraying so badly. So I just trimmed it nice and cleanly with my scissors and then put a little bit of that gift wrapping tape on the back side where it won't show, and that just gives me what I need to work with. So I'm going to start with another little piece of tape, and I'm just going to stick it to my finger and start making my pleats. And I like to start in the middle. This is the part that is going to be in the front of her waist. And so once I have a few of these little pleats in place, I'm going to just hold on to a few at a time and come in with this piece of tape. And I don't try to do the whole thing at one time. I'm just going to come in with this little piece of tape and just get it to hold what I have folded already in place. And these girls are so small that you honestly don't have to do too much, and that's going to be in the front of her dress. And that's all you really need, is just to secure those little designer dress details and just keep a pair of scissors handy, and once you have them taped down, just remove that. You don't want to come too far down because that could get in the way of whatever belt embellishment you try to do. And so I have learned to just do half at a time. So that's that half, and then I'm going to come over and start pleating the other half of her skirt. And I usually try to leave a little bit so that I can hide the raw edges on the back of my doll. And you will find that they are so tiny, you'll be surprised at how little of everything it takes to go around their little bodies, their little arms. Everything is very small on these. Let's see, I think I might just fold this over. As I said, each time, depending on what scraps of fabric or ribbon I'm using, each time my method of securing things changes up a little bit, because this is not an exact science. It's just a simple matter of folding and tucking and securing. So I'm just, before I bring in my glue, I'm just going to wrap this around and see if I got my pleats just where I want them to be. And that is so cute. And then I want to be able to secure it in the back. So before I put her skirt on, I want to use this pink ribbon for her shirt. Now, really important not to have raw edges on these little dolls because they are so small and things will unravel. So I choose a ribbon with a really nice edge, and so that gives me a nice clean edge, and again, without sewing or ironing anything. So I'm going to take a quick measurement and do a crossover top, and I just want my ribbon to cover that shoulder joint, but don't short yourself because you need this to be underneath her skirt. So I'm just going to take a quick measurement front and back. So I need about that much. That is a little bit over an inch of ribbon. So when I tell you to pull your scraps out for this project, I really mean it. You need such tiny amounts of chain, ribbon, fabric, trim, anything. I mean, these are, you can see like an inch and a half maybe in my hand, and I still have too much, but you don't want to short yourself. So I'm going to just make sure I see my placement, and I think on this one I'm going to use a dot of this gel super glue, and I'm going to put it right here. You don't need much of anything for this sweet little project. And so when I put this, I do want to crisscross it. I do want to make it look like a V-neck dress. And I have found that sometimes on certain ribbons or fabrics, certain glues don't work, and I have really just had to do trial and error with that. I just don't always know what's going to stick, and I just need it to stay in place until I can secure it with something else. So that looks pretty. That looks pretty good before I glue the back. So on this one, I think I'm going to switch to this glue stick and just see if I can hold the back of this piece of ribbon in place until I get her skirt on. That's why I chose the 3 types of glue, because you can experiment. Do you see how tiny of an amount of glue is there? And I do like to use glue that gives me a little bit of time, because on these you may need it to reposition. And I do want this ribbon to be really nice and tight, because I want to be able to see the little shape of the girl underneath the ribbon. Okay, and I can trim away this extra so that I don't see any bulk when I put her skirt around her. So on this shiny silver one, I think that the glue stick is going to keep this in place just enough for me to do my other ribbon. So I'm going to go back to that. So as I said in the outset, you might want to just get out a couple of the different glues that you have in your craft room, just so that you have what you need. I'm going to pull this a little bit to the side if you can see what I'm doing, because I do want it to look, I do want to see a little bit of a V-neck, and I do want to see the form of the girl. I want her to have a waist. I want to see her tiny hourglass shape. Okay. Then I'm just going to turn her around and add a little bit more of this glue stick. On this satin ribbon and on this shiny silver metal form, the glue stick is kind of amazing. And I'm going to pull them out to cover those jump rings that are her shoulder joints. And see, we have her little shirt is made. So now I'm going to move on to her skirt. Now on this, I think I am going to switch to a more powerful glue, just because on this satin material with the fraying that I was dealing with, I did put a little bit extra of my tape, so it's a little bit stiff and I have something I can pinch onto. So right in the front here, I am going to put a little dot of this gel control super glue and center those pleats that I made right in the middle and just give that a second to dry. I'm going to pull it down just a little bit because I want to have space to put my belt and my embellishment. And this is where I said you may have be frustrated with the little arms, but I have left them on. I just go slowly and work around them. But as I said, if you feel too frustrated and feel like you're holding on to too many things at once, they are just jump rings and you could remove them. So then I am going to turn her over and add a little bit more of that gel super glue to the back. Just a little line. And move her arms and just pull her skirt around. Now I would do this facing, looking at it from the front, just to make sure. I've turned it the wrong way, but just I'm going to do my best, and I don't want to get super glue on my fingers, but I'm going to do my best to get this around, get her back around to the front. Now her little skirt is doing really well, but I'm going to use the cap. Because this was the second dress that I got out of that tiny little dollar store doll dress, this is a little bit smaller piece than I had on my other one. I'm just going to use the cap. You can have toothpicks handy. I'm just going to use the cap to get rid of some of that excess super glue. It's off to the side, you can't see, but I just put the cap back on. So now I'm going to just give that a second to dry. Check her from the front. She looks so cute. Now, before I embellish further, I don't know if you can see, but we have some raw edges here, and I want to take care of that so that if she becomes a purse charm or a necklace or a bookmarker, there is no fraying. So that is where I like this original tacky glue by Aleene's, but Aleene's also makes a fabric glue. For me, I found that it was a little bit too thin. I have that one as well, But this tacky glue is a glue that I use when I'm shredding sari silk or cutting or ripping fabric to make these boho beads. This tacky glue works beautifully. I even use this when I'm making paper beads. So I'm going to use that just along this raw edge. If you can see, her skirt is open, and I'm just going to come in with a little small bit of this tacky glue right along the edge. It dries clear, but it's nice that it's white when it comes out of the bottle, because that way you can see what you're doing when you put these two together. So let me just get and you do have a little bit of time on this one too. Just get in there. I try really hard not to make a mess with glue and paint, but in the end, I think I'm pretty messy with it. And I think, you know, if you really wanted to, if you were struggling, you could put a piece of tape on the underside, but because this had an organza ribbon on the bottom, I think I'm just going to try to hold it with my finger and give it a moment to dry. And then once you have that initial little bit, I can still see a little bit of raw edge here, so I'm just going to add a little bit more and just get my fingers in there just to make sure I don't have fraying. Like I said, it will dry clear, so don't worry about if you see a little bit of extra on your project. I do use the tacky glue for quite a few. Oh, a white cat just walked by my window. It's beautiful. I have a lot of nature outside my window where my work table is, and it's just lovely. Okay, I'm going to give this a moment to dry, and then the fun part, we get to start embellishing. I decided to use this silver ribbon that I showed you, and I just took a scrap of it. It is a little bit too wide, so I folded it 3 times over, and I was able to do a tie in the back. Sometimes you can just put it on top of each other, like lap it over and glue it, but I'm going to come in with some more of this tacky glue and just get some into that tie. Now, I did not do a knot because, again, these doll forms are so small, so you want to be cautious about making anything too bulky. And as I said, this glue dries clear, so I can be a little bit generous with it here. And I have three glue types with the lids open, and I'm just going to take my finger and just make sure that the back of that is coated, and I'm going to let that dry before I cut away my excess. And then also on the front here, I don't know if you can see, I just got a little bit of glue on her leg. Clean that. Okay, so I don't know if you can see on the front, but a little bit of my tape is showing there. So now that everything is secured in place, I can come in with my cutters or a plier or something and just cut that very carefully away. It is just Scotch tape, just gift wrapping tape, so it should not give you too much of a problem. I just don't want to see it because it's a designer dress after all. So yeah, just go slowly, take your time, and just make sure. If you're not planning to do another embellishment, just clean that off a little bit. So I'm touching the back and it's really not dry. I need to set it aside and let it dry. And in the meantime, I'll show you some of the work on the other little doll that I'm doing in the antique bronze, and we will let her dry and we'll come back and finish her. My goal was to make the clothing for my dolls where there were no raw edges. So I chose scraps of fabric that had the selvage edge, which is the way it comes on the bolt, so it will not fray. And also my goal was to make designer details like the little pleats in the skirt, and if you can see on her, the little crossover neckline on the top of her dress. So the way that I did that was simply using simple gift wrapping tape to hold things in place until I'm ready to dress my doll and then glue them in place. So for this part, this one is already done. You can see my bit of tape on the back, and that is the strip that I made the V-neck on the top of her dress. This one I've also already done my gathers and just used a little piece of tape to hold it in place until I take my empty doll form and wrap it around her, and then I'll show you when we get to that how I finished it so that there are no raw edges going down the side. But again, I wanted to keep this simple with no sewing, but still add all of those details. So this is going to be a little bit larger. These dolls are quite small, so you need this strip to be fairly small, and you'll just have to play with it until you have the right width. And also you need some length of this. I would say this is about 4.5 inches, or you could give yourself 5 inches. You will cut away extra. You will not need all of that because we're going to cut this in half to make the two sides of the top of her dress. So I simply took a length of this packing tape and I am putting it on the edge of my table so that it is at my fingertips. And on this one, I'm going to take my scissors and just give myself a small strip because I am going to put glue on this. So I only need this as a temporary hold until I affix everything permanently. So all I'm going to do on a piece of fabric, this is just a scrap, it's much too short, but all I'm going to do is do a tri-fold. So fold one in and then the other in, and I want to make sure this one is a little bit too fat, so I probably would cut this one off again, but like I said, I'm just showing you the method to my madness. And so once I have it the width that I want to make her top, I am simply going to use this little piece of tape, and I don't want the tape to show on the other side, but just to hold my fold in place. And then if any was hanging over the edge, you can trim that away. So that is the simple motion that got this part of her outfit done. And again, you don't need an iron, you don't need needle and thread, you just need to give those designer dress details and hold them into place for the next part of the project. Now for her skirt, and if you can see this one, I just did one large pleat on the front of her skirt, but for her skirt on the next one that I'm working on, I did a lot of pleats, and you can see it's just my tape there, and I did leave myself a little overlap here because when this goes around her waist, I want to have space on the back to make sure that there's no raw edge and to hide that. So I'll show you that when we get to it. But my method for this, again, is that selvage edge on your bolt of fabric, which is when it is woven, there's no raw edge. It's the way it comes on the bolt. And normally in sewing, you cut that away. You don't normally use that. But I want that to be the edge of her skirt so I don't have any fraying or bits of string constantly coming off of my little doll. And so this one is too short to really do what I did here, but I just want to show you my method. I start in the middle and just make a little fold, and maybe 2 or 3. And then again, I have my bits of tape on the edge of my table, and I'm just going to add the tape to the top of those pleats. And you don't want it to be down too far on your scrap of fabric because we don't want this tape to show once we have dressed our doll and glued everything down. I will usually start in the middle of her pleats because that's going to be the middle of her dress. And here again, this is where you can determine if you want the dress to be long, if you want it to be a mini skirt, you can determine your length. And then once I have that side held down, I will continue my pleats on the other side. And I have my little strips of tape on the side of my table, so my fingers don't have to hold too many things at one time. So that's how I came up with the no-sew pleats. And then again, this is only a little scrap of fabric. It's not quite long enough for what we would need to go around her, but I just wanted to show you the folding and pleating and taping method that I used. And so then I will come in with my scissors and just trim away any of this excess tape, just making a nice clean edge so that when I start my gluing process, I have all of this out of my way. And then you can have fun with your trims. So I had this little tiny piece of trim left that I used for this doll. That would make a really pretty belt. You can use ribbon. I had this little bit of gold trim. It's a metallic trim that I have for the boho beads that I make. I'm working on this little girl while the other one dries, and I just have the front of the pleats glued down. I did the same thing with the fabric where I've hidden the raw edges, which I didn't need to do with the ribbon. And then I have most of this adhered to the back, and I just want to come around, and I am probably going to try to turn this under once I have a little bit of glue here. So I just wanted to show you this completed skirt, because again, my goal is always to not have these fraying edges. So I'm going to try to make a little turn in her skirt. Just pinch it closed and get it face down, if you can see what so I'm just tucking those edges inside. Let me get my hand underneath so I can put a little pressure, kind of like finger pressing. Just put a little bit of pressure on that. So on the back of her skirt, there's no raw edges, and this didn't line up exactly right. It's already starting to set, but that's okay. I'm going to just reposition it, just work it into place. And then if at that point you need to add a little bit more glue, you can. But there's her tiny little dress. And so I am going to add a little bit more glue, but we'll let this one dry. And then let's go back to our other one and get her little teapot wire wrapped and see what we can do on her while this little girl dries. So her skirt and dress, her top and skirt turned out really cute. So I am going to prepare the teapot charm. I strung the bead onto this bead frame that's a silver teapot, and I'm going to do a nice neat wire wrapped loop. So after her glue is dry and she's ready for me to handle her, this will be ready to be put in her hand. So if you noticed on this bead frame, this could have actually taken a 10 millimeter bead, but I chose to stay with an 8 millimeter bead because of the scale, because these dolls are quite small. All of their sections are quite small, and so the scale really matters, and that's one of the things that makes them look good when you add in the details, is not to use too large of a bead for the head and the things that you put in their hands, whether it be a chain walking her dog or a piece of china, a little teapot or teacup, that you're careful to choose something that doesn't look too big or even too tiny for the design of these tiny beaded dolls. So on this, I could have done a larger bead, but I was happy with the 8mm, and I think it's going to fit nicely in her hand. So let me check. I have 2 dolls going on here. Let me check and see how she's doing. Yes, she seems to be pretty well dry. So I'm going to take my scissors now. She's not completely dry, but enough that we can work with her. And I'm going to get rid of these extra. And you know, these scraps could really be useful for another doll. As you've seen, we use very tiny scraps in these. I may go back after I am finished, if you can see, and just tidy her sash or belt up a little bit with a smaller pair of scissors and add a little bit of glue. In fact, I'm a little worried that it won't be secure enough for me to work on it. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of super glue into this little belt. Just get a little bit out, and I'll move to the other doll while this little super glue is drying. I just want to make sure that everything stays where I have put it. So we'll set her aside and go back to this one because her skirt is really nice and dry. Her seam in the back, she looks great. So let's go ahead and put her little neck, which is the crystal rondelle spacer, and this faceted creamy colored barrel bead. It has an AB finish, which just makes her face kind of sparkly. And we have this little hat and a really opaque pink seed bead. And so her head is on. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these do not give you a lot of space. So this loop is going to have to be, I do want a wire wrapped loop, and it is going to have to be a really small one. So I have these Xuron round nose pliers that are quite tiny, and I'm going to switch to those instead of my other round nose pliers. And in fact, I'm even going to use those to make my bend, because this loop, this wire wrapped loop, has to be really small. And I'm going to stay just on the tip, because if you make too large of a loop when you don't have much wire left, you are not going to be able to get your wire around. I can't even get my fingers in there. You could do a simple loop here, but I just like, on these beaded dolls, I just like the security of a wire wrapped loop, and I think I can do it. So if you can see, I am really working with a tiny piece of wire. I don't think I'll even be cutting anything away, but I did get a nice loop. So now I'm going to have to go very slowly, and since it is so small, I'm going to get a really good grip on it. And if I can get even 1.5 wraps, I'm happier with that than a simple loop on this design. So I'm just going to go really slowly and carefully, and maybe even turn it in my hand and just get in there, careful not to crack my bead. And I got it. It is not an easy loop to make. And you really want to be careful not to break this wire coming out of the top of the doll form, because it's really no good if you do. I can't even think of a way to fix it if you break this wire. It's really necessary. So I'm just going to tidy that up a tiny bit. And so her loop is made, her little hat is on, and so now we can start to embellish her. I had to take a pause yesterday from this project because of all of the crazy difficulties that were happening to me during my work day. So it is the next day, and we are at the final finishing touches on our 2 beaded dolls. So we're going to finish them. But I have to tell you, yesterday you wouldn't believe all the things that happened to me while I was trying to work. The drawing that I wanted to do at random using a digital tool to randomly pick the name, the website was down. So then I was researching for another digital tool that would pick the name, and my computer crashed. So I was hours on the phone with a very good friend of mine in Italy, which we're dealing with a 6-hour time difference, so that he could access my computer and help me to sort out the problem. And then Amazon delivered my new microphone a day early, and it was just one thing after another. So I am back with you, and hopefully we'll be able to finish this together. So I'm going to put, I have had such a debate. I think I am going to put this little dog on a chain, but I do like the teacups. I have some China teacups. I wish I could have you guys here with me in person before I connect the dog. I'm just going to have one more look. I have these China teacups. They feel a little bit big to me, but I had another set in my tray that I've had in my supplies for a really long time. As I said, I wish some of you were sitting right here with me at my work table to tell me what you like the best that I could put in her little hand. So I was working on another project, and I was playing with linking these together so that the teacup would hang in front of the saucer. So she could have that in her hand, or just a tiny teacup. Like I said, I wish you all were here with me in person so you could tell me what you like the best. But I think maybe I'm going to stick with my original and have her walking her dog. It's so hard to choose. That's why I end up making another and another, because I think, oh, for the next one, I'll do a tea theme. These are really fun. So let's bring in another set of pliers and add these. So the hole on their hands, if you can see, is quite small. So I do have to have a jump ring, and I try to use the smaller jump rings so they don't show too much, but on these, because this is such a small connection point, I had to use a 6mm jump ring. But we're just going to close that really well, like always. And her dog leash is on. And now the links on this scrap of chain, this little leftover chain, they are not soldered. So I am able to give this a little twist. And I think that the hole on the dog charm, I think it's going to be okay. Yes, it is. If this were not moving freely in the hole at the top of the charm, I would add another jump ring, but I don't need to do it. So she has her little dog on a leash. It is really cute. They make me smile. And now I have these two lacquered. I'm going to do another project using these jump rings. Let me just show you what I've collected. I'm starting to see these in the jewelry marketplace a lot, and so I have the lobster claw clasps and different millimeter sizes of these jump rings that are color coded. And so I was playing with them for summer jewelry because of the anti-tarnish factor. You do have to be careful when you open and close them not to remove the color coating from them. So I'm trying to grab a hold of it carefully without damaging it. But this is going to be her little bracelets. So you see how tiny her little arm is. I think these are 4mm. They might be 3mm. I know I'm going to be far away from the camera, and I wanted you to see, but I'm going to just lay her down like this so that I can close that over her small arm. But it's the same simple motion of twisting, opening, and closing the jump ring. And so that's the only problem with these, is it's really hard to get a hold of them without removing some of the painted coating. That's what I don't like about them. This is so small, I think it's going to be okay. But as I've been working with these jump rings, especially these tiny ones, because you have to grab onto them in order to twist them open. So anyway, I may go back. I have acrylic markers, and I may go back and touch that up when I'm all done with the rest of my embellishments on my doll here. Because, yeah, if your plier slips off of the jump ring, like mine just did, you run the risk of damaging it, but I did a little bit better on that one. But look how cute her little bangles are, and they match her skirt and her blouse. I think it's so sweet. So I think the final thing for this little girl, I did not do a necklace on this one, but I'm going to use my super glue and take one of these fingernail charms, and I'm going to adhere it. I have to find the sweet spot. So if I come up here, do I like it there, or do I like it a little bit below on the pleats? I actually think it looks pretty good right above the belt or sash on her dress. So I'm going to use super glue for this. If I was adhering this to my fingernail, I would use nail glue. But I'm going to just do a tiny dot of super glue because I don't want her to lose her bow. And I think even try to use my plier. Let's see. This gel control super glue is really great because it's gel. It does take a little bit longer to set up, so it gives you a chance to check your position. Maybe I need to add a little bit more glue. Let's see. I'm going to set her aside to let her little bow dry. And then if I feel, oh, it's already setting up, I'm going to set it aside. And if I feel that I need to take and add a little bit more glue on the top just to make it extra secure, I'll come back to it. But let's finish our silver girl together. So this is what I went and when I had to pause, oh, my camera battery died as well while I was filming. Yesterday was just a day. But anyway, I did go back and add a little bit more glue to make sure that her sash, that everything was going to stay in place. So we're going to put her head on first because it's a little bit more fun to embellish when our little doll has her necklace and her head and her hat. So, and as I said, when I was doing the other one, the trick on these is that they really should have given us more length on the wire. And so this part is a little bit tricky. And if you are a person that has trouble with making loops, maybe you want to stick to a simple loop here. I have a tiny bit more space on this one than I did on the bronze one, just because the bead cap on her was a little bit taller. So, but that is not a lot of space to do a wire wrapped loop. In fact, I think, so I'll just tell you, the space on your plier, when you do that and you bend this over, that space, get my finger out of the way, that space there is the space that you have to wrap your wire around, the core wire. And because I don't have much wire left, I'm going to use this tiny tip and get make this space here much less wide, just because I know this is not going to be an easy loop to make. And I'm also going to, when I make my loop, it's going to be a tiny loop, so I'm staying on the end of the plier to give myself a little bit more space here to make those wraps. It is a very tight loop to make. I think I can do it, but even at this part, I would normally lock this in place with my finger. yeah, it's really difficult to hold on to. Maybe I will be able to bring it around with my finger. I actually think I have it, but it's not an easy, it is not an easy wrap. I will be honest with you. So as I mentioned on the other one, if you feel better about just doing a simple loop there, it does take a lot less wire, then you can by all means make that work. But I just like the wrapped loops on these dolls. And I was hoping on this one that I could get a nice tight wrap so that her head and her hat stay facing forward. So it's a little bit tricky, and because the loop is so small and my wire is so short, I don't know if you just noticed what I did, but in order to wrap, I'm just turning my loop in the other direction in my plier. And I want to be careful that I don't break my top bead while I'm trying to get this final wrap and tuck this final end in. I can do it. I mean, I've made a lot of loops, but I'm just giving you guys a heads up because for some of you, this tight of a loop might be very frustrating and be a difficult thing to do, but I think I have it. And look, her head is nice and tight and facing forward. And I also wanted this bead cap to be in this position because I thought it looked better on her tiny little face. So yeah, and I can even turn so she looks like her head is a little bit off to one side. She's so cute. Okay, so now let me clear away some of these pliers. So now she's going to get a teapot in her hand, and I will need a jump ring, and she's also going to get bangles on her other hand, and a little rhinestone bow added to the front of her dress. You can see the way I'm going to connect it. So the spout is on the outer side, so she's not pouring tea on her couture dress. These are so joyful to make, as you can tell where my thoughts go when I'm putting them together. It's a joyful project. Okay, let's see. I'm going to put her little purple bangle on. I'm not sure if these are 3mm or 4mm, but probably either size would work, but their arms are so thin, but it does make it really does make a cute little bracelet for their tiny arms. I'm very far away from my face and very far away from the camera, but I'm trying to close that jump ring without damaging the finish, and that is not easy. So I purchased my collection. When I started seeing these coated jump rings and lobster claw clasps, I noticed that when our national chain in America, if you're watching from outside of the United States, is called Michael's, one of them, we have a few, they started to have a section with these painted jump rings and findings. And I purchased some there, and then I went on Amazon because I like to have a nice quantity of things because I make a lot of jewelry, and I just like to know that I have enough and I'm not counting every little jump ring and every little item when I'm working. But so I did order some from Amazon. So my supplies that I showed you, my box does come from 2 different sources. And I'll have to let you know as I work with these more if I think one is better quality than the other, but you just have to be careful not to remove the paint finish. So she has her little bangles, and now she also is going to get a bow. And on this one, this satin material, I found it very delicate. Any little thing I did damaged the material. The glue showed more. If I removed the tape, it put a little mark on the fabric. So I think I'm just going to place her silver rhinestone bow just a little bit lower than her sash, where I did this one a little higher, just to hide that little bit, and I can still see my pleats. So that's the only thing I would advise as you're adding your final decorations and embellishment to your dolls, is just make sure that you can still see the other details that you have added in, because everything is on quite a tiny scale. So if you add too much bulk or layer things, you may end up hiding something else that you've added that's really cute. And as I said, that Loctite super glue gel, it does give you a moment or two to get your position just right, and it does give you control without having super glue dripping everywhere. And then if you need to go back and add a little bit, you can. I still tend to get glue on my fingers, but this helps to keep it under control a little bit. So I'm going to just set her down to dry, and she's going to get attached to the other end of this satin cord bookmarker with one of my handmade boho beads. And this is even a little gemstone rondelle, and I believe these came from maybe a year and a half or even 2 years ago from a bargain bead box, monthly subscription box. So I'm going to open this large jump ring and add her right to that. And I don't know if I mentioned, but these are just simple glue-on cord ends. A lot of people use these when they're working with leather, but they work beautifully for the ends of my satin cord bookmarkers. And the satin cord lays really nicely inside a book too, without being bulky. And so this is one of my favorite bookmarker designs. And I think I showed in one of my other videos how to make these on your own with just wire. I use 20 gauge wire on these, and I'm finding that even though I've work hardened it and hammered it, that it's not as sturdy as I would like. So when I do these again, and if I include these in another video, I will probably move up to an 18 gauge wire on that. So I want to let her bow dry just a tiny bit more, and I think this little girl might be dry. Let me just check and see if I think I am going to add. It's very secure, but I do not want to lose her bow, so I'm going to get a tiny little bead of glue coming out if I can. Yes, just a tiny bit, and just add it to the top and the bottom, because I have made 2 of these little dolls into bookmarkers for myself, because I always have several books going, but I have not turned one into a pendant. So I think I'm going to put her on a chain and wear her as a pendant. I think she's so cute. So that is her, but you can also turn these girls into purse charms as well, or backpack charms. You can really, once you have them dressed and designed, you can really do so much with them. So I will put some pictures at the end of the video so that you can see our final little girls, because it's hard to see all the details when I'm moving them around on the mat. But I'll get some pictures up and show you guys how they all turned out. And I really hope that this was a joyful video for all of you, as it was for me. And I really hope that it gave you some ideas, and that maybe you'll look at your scraps of things and leftover bits of chain and odd bead caps and scraps of fabric, and even go into your manicure drawer as I did and find some embellishments that are adorable and unusual. So I thank you so much for being with me today. I'm so happy to have gotten through all my technical difficulties. Thanks again, everybody. Ciao.